a homeless Navy SEAL, paid $8 for a flooded mill. Then his K-9 uncovered a secret the river had protected for decades. They laughed when Nathan Cole spent his last $8 on a flood-ruined mill deep in North Carolina's Blue Ridge Mountains. To everyone else, it was a collapsing relic waiting for the next storm. But his retired military German shepherd, Valor, refused to leave the rushing water. What the old dog sensed beneath the current would uncover a forgotten legacy, challenge a ruthless developer, and change an entire valley forever. Comment 1 if you'd trust a loyal dog over everyone else, or 0 if you'd walk away. And tell us where you're watching from. The first frost had settled across the Blue Ridge Mountains long before sunrise, turning every blade of grass silver beneath a pale October sky. Mist drifted through the valleys like slow-moving ghosts, wrapping abandoned barns, weathered fences, and forgotten roads in a quiet that only mountain mornings could create. Nathan Cole sat behind the steering wheel of a faded green pickup truck that had become everything he owned. The engine hadn't started in 2 days. A sleeping bag lay folded behind the seats beside a small duffel bag, 2 worn changes of clothes, an old military backpack, a dented coffee thermos, and a framed photograph turned face down so he wouldn't have to look at it every morning. Beside him, a gray-faced German shepherd lifted his head. Valor. Once one of the Navy's finest military working dogs. Now nearly 11 years old. His muzzle had turned white around the edges, and one ear no longer stood completely upright after a mission years earlier. The stiffness in his hips showed every cold morning, yet his dark eyes remained as sharp as the day Nathan had first met him halfway across the world. Nathan reached over and scratched behind the dog's ear. "You ready, partner?" Valor answered by pressing his nose gently into Nathan's sleeve. The simple gesture carried more comfort than any conversation Nathan had experienced in months. The county tax auction began at 9. Nathan checked his wallet one last time. 1 crumpled $5 bill, 3 $1 bills, nothing else. $8 every cent he still possessed. 6 months earlier, he had owned a modest house outside Asheville. He had believed he was rebuilding a normal life after 12 years as a Navy SEAL. He had believed the nightmares would eventually stop. Instead, they became louder. Some mornings he woke convinced incoming mortar rounds were falling nearby. Sometimes fireworks sent him diving behind parked cars before he realized he wasn't overseas anymore. The panic attacks grew worse. Employers noticed. Construction jobs disappeared. Medical bills grew. The mortgage followed. By spring, the bank had taken the house. Friends promised to call. Most never did. Nathan didn't blame them. PTSD was difficult to understand if you had never lived inside it. People wanted the version of him who smiled in photographs wearing dress whites, not the man who startled at slamming doors or couldn't sleep through thunderstorms. Only one companion had stayed beside him without asking questions. Valor. The retired military K-9 had been officially assigned to Nathan after both left active service. They had survived ambushes together, mountain patrols, night raids, explosions. The dog had trusted Nathan with his life countless times. Now Nathan trusted him with what remained of his own. The pickup rolled downhill after several attempts to coax the reluctant engine alive. The county courthouse sat in the middle of the small mountain town of Blackwater Crossing, where brick storefronts lined a quiet main street beneath fiery autumn maples. A crowd had already gathered outside. Farmers, investors, real estate brokers, local contractors, county officials. Most wore clean jackets and carried folders full of property records. Nathan arrived wearing faded jeans, old work boots, and a brown canvas jacket whose elbows had been patched twice. Valor stepped out beside him, drawing curious glances. Some recognized the military harness. Others simply saw an old dog walking beside an older man who looked like life had forgotten him. Nathan ignored the whispers. He'd learned long ago that pity often hurt worse than insults. Inside the courthouse annex, folding chairs faced a long table where tax-delinquent properties were listed one after another. The auction moved quickly. Mountain cabins, storage lots, small parcels of timberland. Most sold within seconds. Nathan barely listened. His attention stayed fixed on item 47, an abandoned watermill. Blue Ridge Township. Flood damaged. No utilities. Unsafe structure. County recommended demolition. No known commercial value. When the auctioneer finally reached the listing, he adjusted his glasses. Item 47. Granger Mill. Approximately 6 acres bordering Granger Creek. Several people chuckled before he finished reading. The structure has experienced repeated flood damage over the last decade. Foundation instability. Water intrusion. Significant structural deterioration. One investor leaned toward another. You couldn't pay me to own that place. Laughter spread quietly through the room. The auctioneer continued. Opening bid. $8 to satisfy administrative filing. Silence. Not one hand moved. The auctioneer looked around. Any interest? Nothing. Nathan glanced at Valor lying calmly beneath his chair. The dog looked strangely alert. His ears shifted toward the courthouse windows, as though listening to something very far away. Nathan raised his hand. I'll take it. The room turned. Several people actually laughed out loud. The auctioneer blinked. Sir, your bid is $8? Nathan nodded. That's everything I've got. Another round of laughter followed. Near the front sat a tall man wearing an expensive charcoal overcoat. His polished leather shoes looked untouched by mud, and a gold watch glimmered beneath his sleeve. Landon Pierce. Everyone in 3 counties knew the name. He owned vacation developments scattered across western North Carolina. Luxury cabins, mountain resorts, private fishing lodges. If there was money to be made from beautiful land, Landon Pierce usually found it first. He leaned back comfortably. You sure about that, friend? Nathan met his eyes without speaking. Landon smiled. I looked at that property last spring. He folded his arms. Every flood eats another piece of it. More laughter. The river's buying it back one season at a time. Someone behind Nathan added, might as well throw $8 straight into the creek. Even the auctioneer looked uncertain. Any higher bids? None came. The gavel struck. Sold. Nathan signed the paperwork using a borrowed pen. The clerk slid over a small envelope. Inside rested one rusted iron key. Cold. Heavy. Older than anyone in the room. No ribbon. No congratulations. Just a receipt showing he now owned Granger Mill. As Nathan turned toward the exit, Landon called after him. "Hope you packed a life jacket." The room laughed again. Nathan never answered. Outside, crisp mountain air filled his lungs. Valor walked beside him in complete silence. They climbed into the pickup and followed a narrow county road that wound deeper into the mountains. Civilization slowly disappeared. Telephone poles became fewer. Road shoulders crumbled into steep ravines. Brilliant orange maples gave way to towering pines. The farther they drove, the quieter the world became. After nearly 45 minutes, the pavement ended. A gravel road twisted through dense forest before opening into a broad valley where Granger Creek thundered over ancient rocks swollen by weeks of autumn rain. Nathan stopped the truck. Ahead stood what remained of the mill. It leaned slightly toward the river. Its enormous wooden water wheel hung broken and motionless. Several windows were boarded shut. Others stared back like empty eyes. Flood debris lay tangled against stone walls blackened by decades of water. The place looked less abandoned than defeated. Nathan stepped out slowly. "So..." He managed a tired smile. "I guess we're homeowners." Valor climbed from the truck. Instead of following Nathan toward the front entrance, the old German shepherd stopped. Completely. Every muscle stiffened. His ears pointed toward the roaring mill race beside the broken water wheel. His eyes locked onto the rushing current. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply stared. Long enough that Nathan noticed. "Valor?" No response. Nathan walked closer. The dog still wouldn't move. Wind carried the sharp scent of river water through the valley. The current slammed against broken stone foundations before disappearing beneath twisted timbers. Valor took one careful step toward the water, then another. His breathing slowed. His eyes never left the flooded channel. It was the exact expression Nathan remembered from overseas. Not fear, not curiosity. Recognition. Nathan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "What is it, partner?" Valor remained frozen beside the rushing water, as though someone or something beneath the flood was waiting for them. Nathan stood silently beside his old partner, listening to the relentless roar of Granger Creek. White water surged beneath the broken wooden flume, carrying branches, leaves, and years of forgotten memories downstream. The river had a voice unlike any he had heard before, not peaceful, not violent, but persistent, as though it refused to let the past disappear. "Easy, boy." Nathan rested a hand on Valor's neck. The German shepherd finally blinked, slowly turning his head toward Nathan before looking back at the rushing mill race one last time. Only then did he reluctantly follow him toward the old building. The heavy iron key scraped inside the weathered front lock before finally turning with a loud metallic groan. The door pushed inward. Cold air rushed out. The smell hit Nathan immediately. Wet timber, old machinery, mud, rust, and something strangely familiar, the faint scent of coffee buried beneath decades of dust. Morning light slipped through cracked windows, revealing floating particles dancing inside the abandoned mill. The place had once been beautiful. Even after years of neglect, Nathan could still see the craftsmanship. Massive oak beams stretched overhead. Hand-cut stone walls stood nearly 3 feet thick. The old milling equipment rested exactly where workers had left it years before, frozen in time beneath layers of dried mud deposited by countless floods. Water stains climbed halfway up every wall. Another few feet, and the river would have swallowed everything. Nathan set his backpack on an old workbench. "This'll do." His voice echoed through the empty building. No answer came except the distant rush of the creek. Valor began moving slowly through the room, not searching randomly, inspecting. Every doorway, every corner, every shadow. Military habits never truly disappeared. Nathan smiled faintly. "Still clearing rooms, huh?" Valor briefly wagged his tail before continuing his quiet patrol. Nathan stepped outside again. The pickup held little worth carrying inside. A sleeping bag, a flashlight, a small camp stove, 2 cans of soup, 1 change of clothes, an old Navy mug. Everything he owned fit into 2 trips. By sunset, he had built a temporary sleeping space inside what had once been the mill office. The roof still held there, mostly. Rainwater dripped through one corner into a rusted bucket, creating a slow, rhythmic tapping that echoed through the silent building. Nathan heated canned soup over the camp stove. Half went into his own bowl, half into Valor's. The old dog ate quietly before settling beside the doorway, facing outside instead of curling up near the warmth. Always watching, always listening. Nathan leaned against the wall. The silence should have felt peaceful. Instead, his mind began filling it. The river became helicopter blades. The dripping bucket became distant gunfire. A sudden gust rattled broken windows. Nathan jerked upright before realizing where he was. His breathing became shallow. Not here. Not now. He closed his eyes. Count the breaths. 1, 2, 3. The exercise his therapist had taught him months ago still worked. Sometimes. When he finally opened his eyes again, Valor was already standing beside him, without command, without hesitation. The dog gently rested his chin on Nathan's knee. "I'm okay." Nathan whispered the lie anyway. Valor stayed exactly where he was until Nathan's breathing steadied again. Outside, darkness settled across the valley. The river never stopped moving. Neither did the memories. Nathan slept little that first night. Every strange sound woke him. Branches scraping the roof, owls calling from distant pines, the creek pounding against ancient stone. Just before dawn, exhaustion finally won. A dream carried him somewhere he never wanted to revisit. Dust, smoke, a village halfway around the world. His team moving carefully through narrow streets, the explosion, the screaming, water rushing through a shattered canal. Nathan bolted upright. His heart pounded against his ribs. Sweat covered his forehead despite the cold mountain air. For one terrifying second, he couldn't remember where he was. Then Valor nudged his hand. The old dog's calm eyes slowly pulled him back into the present. Blue Ridge Mountains, North Carolina. The mill. Not overseas. Not anymore. Nathan rubbed his face. "Thanks, partner." Morning sunlight spilled across the valley as they stepped outside. The property looked even worse in daylight. Broken fencing stretched along the creek. Trees leaned dangerously close to the roof. Mud covered nearly every walkway. Nathan grabbed an old shovel leaning against the wall. One thing at a time, he started clearing debris from the front entrance. Hours passed. Every wheelbarrow of mud revealed another beneath it. Rotting boards collapsed underfoot. Rusted nails appeared everywhere. It felt less like repairing a building than excavating forgotten history. By noon, the sound of an approaching pickup echoed across the valley. Nathan straightened. A faded blue farm truck rolled slowly into the clearing. An elderly man climbed out carrying 2 paper sacks. He wore worn denim overalls beneath a heavy canvas jacket. His white beard reached nearly to the top button of his shirt. He removed his cap politely. "You Nathan Cole?" Nathan nodded cautiously. "That's me." The old man smiled. "I'm Calvin Mercer." He extended a rough, weathered hand. "I own the feed store about 4 miles down the road." Nathan shook it. "What can I do for you?" Calvin looked around the battered mill. Nothing. He lifted one of the paper sacks, but figured you might need something. Inside were sandwiches, fresh apples, coffee still warm inside a thermos. Nathan stared for a moment. "I don't have money." Calvin chuckled softly. "I didn't ask for any." Nathan hesitated. People rarely offered kindness without expecting something back. Calvin seemed to read the thought. "I knew Elias Granger." He looked toward the old mill. For nearly 40 years. Nathan glanced toward the building. "The previous owner." Calvin nodded. "Best stubborn fool this valley ever produced." He sat comfortably on an old log. "You know what folks around here always got wrong?" Nathan shook his head. They thought Elias stayed poor because the mill never made enough money. Calvin smiled to himself. Truth was, he gave most of it away. Nathan looked up. Calvin continued. Some years he'd grind grain for families who couldn't pay. Other winters he'd let stranded travelers sleep upstairs when the mountain roads closed. Sometimes folks disappeared into this valley desperate. They usually left with hope. Nathan listened quietly. It doesn't make much sense financially. No. Calvin agreed. It never did. A breeze stirred the trees overhead. Calvin's eyes wandered toward the broken water wheel. But somehow, he always managed. Nathan looked around the abandoned property. Doesn't look like it helped him much. The old man smiled sadly. Depends how you measure helping. They sat without speaking for several moments. Finally, Calvin stood. There's someone else you'll probably meet. Margaret Lawson, the attorney who handled Elias's estate. Nathan frowned. I already own the place. True, Calvin said. But she asked me to tell you she'd been hoping someone would finally buy it. She still has something that belongs with this mill. Late that afternoon, Nathan drove into the nearby town of Ash Hollow. Margaret Lawson's office occupied the second floor above an old pharmacy. She appeared to be in her late 60s, with silver hair neatly pinned back and reading glasses hanging from a thin chain. Before Nathan could introduce himself, she smiled. So, you finally arrived. Nathan blinked. You knew someone would buy it. I hoped. She corrected gently. She opened an old wooden drawer and removed a small cloth pouch. Inside rested another iron object. Not a key. The key Nathan already possessed fit inside it, like two matching pieces forged together decades earlier. Margaret placed both into Nathan's hands. Elias instructed me never to separate them. He said they belonged to the person who purchased the mill after everything else had been lost. Nathan looked confused. What does this unlock? Margaret smiled. Honestly, don't know. She leaned back quietly. But he left one message. Nathan waited. She repeated it exactly. Only someone who has already lost everything will know how to use this. Nathan looked down at the rusted iron pieces resting in his palm. They felt heavier than metal should. When he returned to the mill that evening, the valley glowed beneath a fiery orange sunset. Valor greeted him immediately, but only for a moment. Then, without making a sound, the old German shepherd turned, walked directly past Nathan, and once again took his place beside the flooded chamber beneath the broken water wheel. He sat perfectly still, watching the rushing water, waiting, as though every evening, something beneath the current called only to him. Nathan stood on the weathered stone bank, watching Valor with growing unease. The old German shepherd had faced enemy gunfire without flinching. He had tracked hidden explosives, located wounded soldiers beneath collapsed buildings, and once pulled Nathan from a smoke-filled compound after an explosion had buried half the structure. Nathan trusted the dog more than he trusted his own instincts, which was exactly why Valor's behavior unsettled him. The river was saying nothing Nathan could hear. Yet every evening, the dog returned to the same place beneath the broken water wheel. Always the same spot. Always the same unwavering stare. The next morning, Nathan carried a pry bar toward the old wheel chamber. Let's settle this. Valor rose immediately, tail low but wagging once, then led Nathan along the slippery stone edge until they stood only a few feet from the rushing current. The chamber was partially flooded. Water surged beneath massive wooden beams blackened by decades of moisture. Moss covered the old stonework, and twisted branches jammed themselves against the remains of the water wheel after every storm. Nathan crouched carefully. See something? Valor stepped forward. Not into the water, just to the edge. His nose hovered over the surface before he looked back at Nathan. There. Nathan searched for nearly 20 minutes. Nothing. No trapped animal, no exposed pipe, no loose beam, only rushing water swirling over smooth river stones. He laughed softly at himself. I guess you fooled me. Valor didn't move. Nathan finally stood and returned to clearing brush around the mill. By noon, he had dragged 3 fallen trees away from the front entrance and stacked enough firewood to last several cold nights. Every movement left his shoulders aching, his hands blistered beneath worn work gloves. But physical pain made sense, unlike the invisible wounds that followed him everywhere. Hard work had always quieted his mind, until rain arrived. Clouds gathered over the mountains that afternoon, dark and heavy. Calvin Mercer drove up just as thunder echoed across the valley. You ought to get inside. Nathan looked toward the sky. I've worked through worse. Calvin shook his head. Mountain storms aren't like city storms. They come fast. The first drops struck the tin roof seconds later. Within minutes, rain poured from the sky in solid sheets. The creek changed almost immediately. Water climbed over exposed rocks. The peaceful current transformed into a roaring wall of brown water, carrying branches and broken logs downstream. Nathan stood beneath the mill porch, watching the storm. The sound. That was the problem. Rain striking metal, water crashing against stone, the constant thunder rolling through narrow valleys. Without warning, the years disappeared. His breathing shortened. His vision narrowed. Another storm. Another country. Another operation. He smelled wet concrete instead of mountain earth. Radio chatter filled his ears. Someone shouted coordinates. Another voice screamed for a medic. Nathan spun toward the river. Except, it wasn't a river anymore. His mind insisted it was the flooded canal outside a shattered compound thousands of miles away. His pulse hammered. He could hear rotor blades, or maybe thunder. He couldn't tell. Someone was trapped. Someone needed him. He stepped into the rain. Nathan! Calvin called after him. The words barely reached him. Nathan kept walking. His boots splashed through rising water toward the swollen creek. His breathing became frantic. Every instinct screamed to reach the imaginary casualties before the water swallowed them. He stepped closer. One more pace, another. The muddy bank crumbled beneath his boot. Suddenly, 70 pounds of determined German shepherd slammed into his side. Valor hit Nathan with enough force to knock him sideways onto the soaked grass. Nathan gasped. What? Before he could finish, the ground where he had been standing collapsed into the torrent. A section of the riverbank disappeared instantly beneath the raging current. Nathan stared in shock. Had he taken one more step, the flood would have pulled him directly into the creek. Valor stood over him, ears forward, body trembling. Rain poured off the dog's coat. Nathan blinked several times. The helicopters vanished. The shouting stopped. The canal disappeared. Only the Blue Ridge Mountains remained. Only the storm. Only the river. Only Valor. Nathan buried both hands into the dog's soaked fur. I'm here. His voice cracked. I'm here. Valor licked Nathan's cheek once, then turned toward the collapsing bank again. Another section gave way. Mud and rocks disappeared beneath the current. Nathan finally understood how close he had come. Calvin hurried over, carrying a heavy tarp. You all right? Nathan nodded slowly. I think. He looked at Valor. No. He corrected himself. I think he saved my life. Calvin rested a hand on Nathan's shoulder, but wisely said nothing. Some things didn't need words. The storm lasted nearly 2 hours. By evening, the rain finally weakened into a cold drizzle. The creek remained dangerously high. Branches jammed themselves against the broken water wheel, shaking the old structure with each impact. Nathan lit a lantern inside the mill. Valor lay beside the doorway, exhausted. Only then did Nathan notice blood. A dark streak marked the dog's left shoulder. He dropped to one knee. Easy. Carefully parting the wet fur, Nathan found a deep scrape several inches long, probably caused by submerged metal or jagged stone when Valor had lunged into him. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it was ugly. Nathan cleaned it using the last of his antiseptic from an old military first aid kit. Valor never whimpered. He simply rested his head against Nathan's leg while the bandage was wrapped securely around his shoulder. "You've still got terrible timing." Nathan smiled weakly. "But good instincts." Later that night, sleep refused to come. Nathan replayed the afternoon again and again. If Valor hadn't acted, he looked toward the old dog sleeping nearby. Military working dogs weren't trained to panic. They reacted to facts. Something had convinced Valor Nathan was in danger before Nathan himself knew it. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Mist floated across the valley after the storm. The creek remained swollen but had already begun dropping. Nathan carried a bucket toward the wheel chamber to inspect the damage. Large branches had washed away overnight. So had several piles of driftwood. The receding water exposed fresh sections of stone foundation normally hidden beneath the current. Nathan froze. Near the place where Valor always stood, several long scrape marks crossed a flat rock beneath the shallow water. Perfectly straight, perfectly parallel. They weren't natural. River currents didn't carve fresh lines through solid stone overnight. He stepped closer. The scratches continued beneath the surface before disappearing beneath a thick layer of silt. Nathan frowned. Someone had dragged something heavy there. Not recently, but not centuries ago either. The marks looked maintained, as though floodwaters repeatedly buried them, only for the river to uncover them again. Valor limped toward the spot despite the fresh bandage. He lowered his nose, then gently pawed once at the edge of the water. Nathan crouched beside him. "What are you trying to tell me?" The dog looked directly into his eyes, then back at the stone. Nathan reached into the shallow current. Cold water rushed around his wrist. His fingertips brushed smooth rock. Then, metal. Not loose debris, not random scrap. Something flat, something solid, something deliberately placed beneath decades of mud. Nathan pulled his hand back slowly. The scrape marks, the hidden metal. Valor's relentless attention. None of it fit together. He looked at the old mill towering silently above them. For the first time, Nathan stopped believing the abandoned building had merely survived the floods. It felt as though the floods had been protecting something, and whatever lay beneath the water, Valor had been trying to lead him to it from the very beginning. Nathan remained crouched beside the flooded wheel chamber long after the morning fog had lifted. The cold mountain water rushed around his boots, while his fingers traced the smooth edge of the hidden metal beneath the surface. It wasn't loose debris. It wasn't part of the broken machinery. It felt deliberate, engineered. He stood slowly and looked at Valor. The old German shepherd's bandaged shoulder clearly bothered him, yet he ignored the discomfort completely. His eyes remained fixed on the same spot beneath the current. Nathan had learned something during 12 years in the teams. When evidence refused to fit the obvious explanation was usually wrong. He wasn't about to tear into stone foundations blindly. First, he needed patience. For the next 3 days, the mountain weather cooperated. No rain. Bright autumn skies. The swollen creek gradually surrendered what the storm had claimed. Every morning, Nathan checked the waterline. Every afternoon, it had dropped another inch. While he waited, he continued restoring the mill. He cleared more mud from the workshop, repaired loose floorboards, covered broken windows with salvaged lumber. The work kept his hands busy. It also kept the nightmares quieter. Each evening, Calvin Mercer stopped by after closing the feed store. Sometimes he brought coffee, sometimes sandwiches, occasionally nothing more than quiet company. Neither man felt the need to fill every silence. On the 4th evening, Calvin noticed Valor lying beside the wheel chamber once again. He sure favors that spot. Nathan nodded. I think he knows something's down there. Calvin studied the creek thoughtfully. You know, my grandfather used to tell stories about this mill. Nathan looked up. What kind of stories? The sort old mountain folks told children. Calvin smiled faintly. They claimed Elias rebuilt parts of the foundation after the flood of '82. But nobody ever remembered seeing contractors. They just woke up one spring, and somehow everything below the wheel looked different. Nathan glanced toward the rushing water. You think he hid something? Calvin shrugged. I think Elias Granger believed in keeping promises. What promises? The old man smiled. If I knew that, I wouldn't be wandering along with you. The next morning, Nathan awoke before sunrise. An icy wind swept through the valley. When he stepped outside carrying his coffee, he stopped. The creek had finally fallen enough to expose several feet of stone beneath the wheel. Valor was already standing there, waiting. Nathan grabbed his shovel, then the pry bar. Finally, the heavy iron tool Calvin had loaned him. The hidden metal lay exposed beneath a layer of packed silt. Working carefully, Nathan scraped away mud accumulated over decades. Slowly, its shape emerged. Not random steel. A rectangular maintenance grate. Heavy, rusted, built directly into the stone floor beneath the wheel. 2 iron lifting rings rested flush against its surface. Nathan washed away more mud using buckets of creek water. The grate measured nearly 4 feet wide. Its edges disappeared beneath ancient stonework. He tested it. Nothing. The hinges had frozen solid long ago. Nathan wedged the pry bar beneath one corner. Pushed. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. Valor stepped closer despite his healing shoulder. The dog watched every movement. Nathan repositioned the bar, planted both boots firmly, then threw his full weight backward. A deep metallic groan echoed beneath the mill. Rust cracked. Mud shifted. One corner lifted barely half an inch. Nathan smiled. There you are. Another attempt. Then another. Each movement loosened decades of corrosion. Finally, with one powerful pull, the entire grate lurched upward. A blast of cool, stale air escaped from below. Not swamp water, not mold, something older. Dry. Still. Nathan knelt carefully. Beneath the grate, Narrow stone steps disappeared into darkness. The chamber below remained completely dry. He switched on his flashlight. The beam reached only halfway before vanishing into blackness. Valor looked toward the opening, then back at Nathan. Nathan clipped a fresh lantern onto his belt. "You've gotten us this far. I guess we finished together." The steps descended nearly 15 feet beneath the mill. Every stone had been laid by skilled hands generations earlier. There were no signs of flooding, no standing water, no collapse, only silence. At the bottom stood a thick oak door reinforced with iron bands. Unlike everything else above ground, this door showed almost no rust. Nathan froze. The old iron key. He reached into his pocket. Margaret Lawson's strange gift suddenly made sense. The key fit perfectly. The lock turned smoothly, as though someone had oiled it yesterday. The heavy door swung inward. Nathan raised the lantern. The room beyond stole his breath, not because of treasure, because of order. Every shelf stood perfectly organized. Waterproof military surplus containers lined one wall. Heavy steel document cases filled another. Wooden crates sat neatly stacked according to size. Everything carried handwritten labels. Everything had been protected with extraordinary care. Nothing appeared abandoned. It looked preserved. Nathan slowly opened the nearest steel container. Inside rested dozens of black and white photographs sealed in waxed envelopes. Families standing beside repaired barns. Children holding graduation diplomas. Veterans smiling outside newly built homes. None of the photographs appeared expensive. Everyone appeared deeply personal. He opened another case. Leather journals, each carefully dated, each wrapped inside oilcloth. The earliest entry began more than 30 years earlier. Nathan opened the first ledger. Beautiful handwriting covered every page. No bank accounts, no investment records. Instead, names, dates, small notes. October 14th. Paid winter heating bill for the Johnson family. Asked them never to mention it. March 2nd. Covered veterinary costs for the Hendersons after losing 3 calves. No repayment expected. July 19th. Bought school supplies for twins starting 5th grade. Delivered anonymously before sunrise. Nathan turned another page. September 6th. Quietly paid overdue mortgage installment for the Bakers. The bank never knew. Neither did their children. Another. December 21st. 3 stranded travelers. Fed supper. Opened upstairs rooms during snowstorm. Refused payment. Another. May 11th. Veteran struggling after returning home. Found work through Calvin. Checked on him every Friday afterward. Nathan swallowed hard. These weren't financial records. They were histories. Evidence that one quiet man had spent decades holding an entire community together without asking for recognition. Every completed entry ended exactly the same way, the same sentence, written carefully. Kindness is only complete when it keeps moving. Nathan whispered the words aloud. Kindness is only complete when it keeps moving. His flashlight drifted across the remaining shelves. There were dozens more ledgers, 30 years of them, maybe more. No gold bars, no hidden fortune, something far more difficult to measure. human lives. He sat slowly on an old wooden chair. The silence surrounding him felt almost sacred. Suddenly, the abandoned mill above no longer seemed forgotten. It had been guarding something. Not wealth. Memory. Valor walked quietly into the chamber. He ignored every crate, every shelf. Instead, he approached the final row of ledgers, sat beside them, then looked back toward Nathan, as if to say, "Keep reading." Nathan smiled through unexpected tears. "You already knew." The old German shepherd gently wagged his tail. Nathan reached down and scratched behind the familiar ears. "I spent months believing I'd lost everything." His voice echoed softly through the hidden room. But someone spent 30 years proving that's never how life is measured. Outside. The ancient water wheel creaked quietly as the creek continued flowing through the valley. The river had not buried this place. It had protected it. Protected every photograph, every journal, every act of compassion, waiting patiently for someone willing to look beneath the surface instead of walking away. Nathan closed the first ledger carefully. His eyes drifted across the endless rows still waiting to be opened. Only one question remained. Why would a man go to such extraordinary lengths to hide kindness instead of wealth? The question followed Nathan long after he climbed back into the daylight. The cool mountain air felt different now. The abandoned mill no longer looked like a forgotten ruin standing beside a restless creek. It looked like a guardian. Every cracked beam, every weathered stone, every scar left by decades of flooding had protected something far more valuable than money. Valor limped quietly behind him, favoring his injured shoulder, but refusing to leave Nathan's side. Nathan looked down at the old German shepherd. "You knew there was something important." Valor's tail swept gently across the fallen leaves. Nathan smiled. "I should have listened sooner." For the first time in months, hope settled inside him. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. It felt fragile like the first light before sunrise. He spent the rest of the afternoon carefully returning everything exactly as he had found it. Every journal went back onto its shelf. Every steel container was closed. The lantern's flame reflected briefly across rows of leather-bound ledgers before Nathan locked the hidden chamber again. The iron key slid back into his pocket. Whatever happened next, the secret would remain safe. Outside, the valley glowed beneath golden afternoon light. The broken water wheel cast long shadows across the creek. Nathan found himself imagining Elias Granger walking these same stones decades earlier, not carrying sacks of gold, not hiding riches, simply recording kindness that no one else ever noticed. He whispered the sentence one more time. "Kindness is only complete when it keeps moving." Valor looked toward him. Nathan nodded. "Maybe that's why you brought me here." The peaceful moment lasted less than an hour. A white county pickup appeared on the gravel road. Dust drifted behind its tires until it stopped beside the mill. Two officials stepped out. One wore a reflective safety vest. The other carried a thick clipboard beneath his arm. Nathan walked forward before they reached the porch. "Can I help you?" The older official removed his glasses. "You Nathan Cole?" "Yes." "I'm Harold Simmons." He extended a hand. "County building and safety." Nathan shook it. Harold's expression remained polite but heavy. "I wish this were a social visit." Nathan's stomach tightened. The younger inspector unfolded several photographs across the hood of the truck. Images of cracked foundations, flood damage, collapsed retaining walls, the broken water wheel. Harold sighed. We inspected this property after the spring flood. He glanced toward the mill. Frankly, we didn't expect anyone to buy it. Nathan remained silent. Harold opened a large envelope. I'm required to serve this personally. He handed Nathan several official documents. The bold heading caught Nathan immediately. Final notice of condemnation. He kept reading. Unsafe structure. Outstanding county taxes. Flood mitigation violations. Failure to repair. Nathan reached the final page. 30 calendar days. After that, the county would seize the property. Demolition would begin. The land would be transferred through redevelopment proceedings. Nathan looked up slowly. 30 days. Harold nodded. I'm afraid so. Nathan glanced toward the mill. I just bought it. I know. Harold answered quietly. I argued for an extension. The commissioners wouldn't approve one. Nathan flipped through the remaining pages. The amount owed nearly stopped him cold. Years of unpaid property taxes, interest, administrative penalties, engineering fees, flood assessments. The total exceeded anything he could possibly pay. Even if he sold everything he owned, it wouldn't amount to a fraction of it. Harold lowered his voice. I don't like delivering these. I grew up not far from here. My father used to bring us to this mill. He paused. Elias was a good man. Nathan studied him carefully. Then why tear it down? Harold looked away. The county says repairs cost too much. The developers disagree. Nathan understood immediately. They want the land. The older man didn't answer. He didn't need to. After both officials drove away, silence returned to the valley. Nathan stood motionless with the paperwork in his hands. 30 days. The ledgers hidden beneath the mill suddenly felt impossibly fragile. 30 years of compassion. 1 month from disappearing forever beneath bulldozers. Valor rested his head against Nathan's elbow. Nathan absent-mindedly scratched behind the dog's ears. I don't know how. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I don't even know where to start. Late that afternoon, another vehicle arrived. Unlike the county truck, this one gleamed beneath the autumn sun. A black luxury SUV rolled smoothly into the gravel clearing. Nathan recognized it immediately. Landon Pierce. The developer climbed out wearing polished boots that somehow collected no dust. He smiled before speaking. I figured I'd find you here. Nathan said nothing. Landon looked around the property with practiced eyes. He wasn't seeing history. He was measuring profit. Beautiful valley. He adjusted the cuffs of his expensive coat. Once the old structure comes down, the view alone will sell million-dollar cabins. Nathan folded the condemnation notice without replying. Landon noticed. They finally delivered it. It wasn't a question. Nathan met his gaze. You already knew. I attend county meetings. Landon smiled. I like staying informed. He walked toward the broken wheel, careful not to dirty his boots. You've got spirit. I'll give you that. But spirit doesn't stop floodwater. Nathan remained silent. Neither does sentiment, Landon continued. The county will demolish this place. You'll lose everything. Again. The last word lingered deliberately. Nathan recognized the tactic. Pressure. Humiliation. Wear someone down until surrender feels reasonable. Landon reached into his jacket. I came to save you some trouble. He produced a checkbook. I'm willing to buy your rights before the condemnation becomes official. Nathan frowned. What rights? The redevelopment option. Landon smiled. You sign. You walk away. You leave with enough money to start somewhere else. Nathan glanced at the blank check. It represented more money than he had seen in years. Enough for an apartment, reliable transportation, medical treatment, maybe even a fresh beginning. Landon noticed the hesitation. There's no shame in losing to a river. He looked toward the damaged foundation. Nature already made the decision. Nathan's eyes drifted toward the mill, then toward Valor. The old German shepherd stood between them. Quiet. Watchful. Unmoving. Nathan remembered the hidden chamber, the ledgers, the photographs, the final sentence written across every page. Kindness is only complete when it keeps moving lowly. Nathan looked back at Landon. This place isn't for sale. Landon laughed softly. Everything has a price. Not this. Nathan answered. The smile faded from Landon's face. You really think you can save it? I don't know. Nathan admitted honestly. But I know I won't be the one who destroys it. For several long seconds, neither man spoke. Wind stirred the yellow leaves around the old mill. Finally, Landon slipped the blank check back into his pocket. When the 30 days run out, he smiled again. I'll still be here. The SUV disappeared down the gravel road. Dust settled slowly across the valley. Nathan remained standing beside Valor. The silence felt heavier than before. Not because hope had vanished, because hope now had a deadline. 30 days. No contractors, no money, no equipment, no crew. Only one aging Navy SEAL, one retired military dog, and a forgotten mill hiding the greatest secret Nathan had ever found. He unfolded the county notice once more. The demolition date stared back at him. Valor quietly leaned against his leg. Nathan looked toward the mountains rising beyond the valley. I've faced impossible missions before. He took a slow breath. I just never faced one without a team. The creek continued flowing beneath the broken water wheel. Steady, unyielding, as if counting down every remaining day. Nathan stood beside the broken water wheel until the last light disappeared behind the Blue Ridge Mountains. The creek never slowed. It rushed through the valley with the same quiet determination it had carried for generations, indifferent to deadlines, property deeds, or the fears of one broken man standing on its bank. 30 days. The number echoed through Nathan's mind with every heartbeat. He had survived combat missions measured in minutes. Now he faced a battle measured in days. Neither felt any less impossible. Valor limped toward the porch and lay beside the entrance to the mill, watching the dark tree line beyond the clearing. The old German shepherd had resumed his familiar guard. Nathan noticed something comforting in that. The dog still believed this place was worth protecting. Maybe that was reason enough to keep trying. Inside, the lantern cast a warm circle of light across the worn wooden floor. Nathan spread the county documents across the old workbench. Repair estimates, structural reports, tax notices, engineering assessments. Each page seemed designed to prove the same point. Give up. He folded them neatly, then looked toward the hidden chamber beneath the mill. His eyes settled on the iron key resting in his hand. If you left anything else behind, he whispered into the empty room. I could use the help. He climbed down the narrow stone staircase once again. The air below remained cool and perfectly dry. Nothing had changed. The rows of journals stood exactly where he had left them. Photographs rested inside their steel containers. The hidden room felt untouched by time. Nathan carried the lantern deeper inside. He had read only a handful of the ledgers. Dozens remained. If Elias Granger had hidden this place so carefully, perhaps there was more than records. Perhaps there was guidance. He began examining every shelf. One by one. Nothing. More journals, more photographs, carefully labeled document cases. Hours passed. The lantern burned lower. Valor eventually wandered quietly into the chamber and settled beside Nathan without making a sound. Nathan rubbed tired eyes. I know. We're probably chasing ghosts. As he returned another leather ledger to its place, his fingers brushed against something behind the final row of books. Paper. Hidden flat against the stone wall. He carefully slid it free. It was an envelope, cream-colored, thicker than ordinary stationery. Its edges had yellowed with age, but the wax seal remained unbroken. Nathan turned it over. Only 5 words were written across the front in elegant handwriting. To whoever stayed. He stared at them for a long moment. Not to family, not to heirs, not to lawyers. To whoever stayed. His pulse quickened. Very carefully, he broke the seal. Inside rested a folded letter written on heavy paper. Nathan unfolded it beneath the lantern. The handwriting matched every journal. Strong. Patient. Steady. He began to read aloud. To whoever stayed. If you are reading this letter, then 3 things have already happened. I am gone. The river has done what rivers always do, and you chose not to leave. Nathan paused. The words felt strangely personal. He continued. I never believed buildings were worth saving simply because they were old. They matter only if they continue serving people. If this mill has survived long enough for you to find these rooms, then perhaps it still has work left to do. Nathan swallowed. Valor lifted his head as if listening. I did not hide these ledgers because they contained money. I hid them because kindness disappears more quickly than wealth. People remember buildings. They forget sacrifices. I could not allow that to happen. Nathan turned the page. His breathing slowed. I have no children. I have no family likely to understand why I spent my life this way. They would sell this place. They would measure its value in lumber and land. I measured it differently. Nathan looked around the hidden chamber. Every shelf suddenly carried deeper meaning. The letter continued, "If you have found this room, then I believe you already understand loss. Only those who have lost enough begin to recognize what truly remains." Nathan felt those words settle deep inside him. They sounded less like advice, and more like someone who had somehow known exactly who would someday stand in this room. He kept reading. "You will be tempted to use these records to collect debts. Do not. That was never their purpose." Nathan frowned. Instead of confusion, relief slowly spread across his face. "I never helped people expecting repayment. I wrote their stories down because gratitude fades, but memory, if protected, can outlive us all." Nathan turned to the final page. The handwriting became slightly weaker, as though written during illness. "The county may someday threaten this mill. Greed always arrives dressed as progress. Do not waste your strength fighting anger with anger. Simply remind people who they once were." Nathan lowered the paper for a moment. Silence surrounded him. The creek continued flowing somewhere above. He read the remaining lines. "If the day comes when this place needs saving, use the stories, not as weapons, as mirrors. Some will ignore them, some will laugh, but enough will remember. And that will be enough." Nathan reached the final paragraph. "I leave this place to no name, no bloodline, no inheritance. I leave it to whoever refuses to walk away. The mill never belonged to me. I was only its keeper. Now, it belongs to you." The signature below was simple. Elias Granger. Nathan lowered the letter into his lap. He didn't realize tears had begun running down his face until one landed on the page. Valor quietly walked closer. The old German shepherd rested his head across Nathan's knee. Nathan placed one hand gently against the dog's neck. "I thought there had to be money." He smiled faintly through the emotion. "There isn't." Valor remained still. There never was. Nathan looked around the chamber again. The hidden room no longer felt mysterious. It felt entrusted. The photographs, the journals, the ledgers, they weren't evidence of charity. They were evidence that ordinary kindness had quietly shaped an entire valley. Nathan folded the letter carefully. As he slipped it back into the envelope, something thin slid from inside and drifted onto the stone floor. A second piece of paper. Smaller. Handwritten. Nathan picked it up. Only one sentence appeared. "My real savings account is on these shelves. If the day ever comes, do not ask people to repay me. Simply remind them." Nathan stared at the words. Everything suddenly fit together. The hidden room, the secrecy, the ledgers, the strange message Margaret Lawson had repeated. Only someone who has already lost everything will know how to use this. It had never referred to the iron key. The key only opened the door. Loss opened the understanding. Nathan stood slowly. His shoulders felt different, not lighter, stronger. Purpose had quietly replaced despair. The county wanted taxes. Landon Pierce wanted land. Neither understood what rested beneath the mill. This was never about property. It was about memory, about responsibility, about continuing something larger than himself. He slipped Elias's letter safely inside his jacket, then extinguished the lantern. As he and Valor climbed the stone steps back toward the night air, Nathan looked once over his shoulder at the hidden chamber. "I won't ask anyone to pay you back." His voice echoed softly through the darkness. "I'll just remind them." Outside, dawn's first pale light began touching the mountain peaks. Valor paused beside the porch, lifting his nose toward the valley below. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine, river water, and distant wood smoke from homes waking across the mountains. Nathan followed the same direction. For the first time since arriving, he wasn't wondering how to save the mill. He was wondering who still remembered what Elias Granger had once done for them. Morning sunlight spilled over the Blue Ridge Mountains, washing the valley in soft gold. Thin ribbons of fog drifted across Granger Creek, while the old mill stood quietly against the hillside, worn but unbroken. For the first time since arriving, Nathan no longer felt like a man hiding from the world. He felt like someone carrying a message. Valor limped beside him as they drove into Ash Hollow. The German shepherd's shoulder was healing, though every few steps reminded Nathan of the price the old dog had already paid protecting him. Their first stop was Calvin Mercer's feed store. The little bell above the front door jingled softly. Calvin looked up from repairing a seed spreader. One glance at Nathan's face told him something had changed. "You found more than old papers." Nathan nodded. "I found a letter." Calvin quietly locked the front door. Without asking another question, he led Nathan into the small office behind the store where an old wood stove glowed against the cool morning air. Nathan unfolded Elias Granger's letter. He read every word aloud. Neither man spoke until the final sentence faded into silence. Calvin removed his glasses and slowly rubbed his eyes. "I'll be." His voice cracked. "I knew he was helping people. I never knew. He kept track of all of us." Nathan reached into his backpack and carefully placed one of the earliest ledgers onto the desk. Leather worn smooth, pages yellowed with age. Calvin opened it carefully. Within seconds, he stopped. His weathered fingers rested on one entry, March 11th. Helped Calvin Mercer after feed warehouse fire. Paid supplier balance anonymously. Told him to rebuild before worrying about repayment. Calvin stared at the handwriting. "I never knew," he whispered. "The bank manager told me an anonymous donor cleared the account. I spent 25 years trying to figure out who saved my business." A tear slipped quietly into his white beard. It was Elias. Nathan remained silent. Calvin turned another page, then another. Names, families, stories. He knew nearly all of them. The Bakers. They still own the apple orchard. He flipped another page. Sarah Whitmore. She became county librarian. Another. Tom Jenkins. He built half the bridges in this county. Nathan watched realization spread across the old man's face. Finally, Calvin closed the ledger gently. Elias wasn't keeping records. No. Nathan replied. He was protecting memories. Calvin looked toward the window overlooking Main Street. People deserve to remember. Nathan nodded. I don't think he wanted money. He wanted people reminded. A slow smile appeared beneath Calvin's beard. Then that's exactly what we'll do. Nathan frowned. We? Calvin chuckled. You really think I'm letting you carry this by yourself? Before Nathan could answer, Calvin stood and reached for his truck keys. We're not asking anyone for donations. We're not collecting debts. We're simply taking Elias back home. They spent the rest of the morning making careful copies of several ledger pages. Not the entire books. Only the entries belonging to specific people. Each copy was folded neatly into plain envelopes. No explanation, no request, just memories. Their first stop stood 5 miles outside town. A large cattle ranch spread across rolling hills beneath distant mountain peaks. Massive red barns overlooked fields where black Angus cattle grazed peacefully. A weathered sign read, Miller Family Ranch. Thomas Miller himself stepped out of the equipment shed. A broad-shouldered man in his late 40s with sunburned skin and rough hands. He recognized Calvin immediately. Morning. Then his eyes settled on Nathan. You must be the fellow who bought the old mill. Nathan nodded. Thomas smiled politely. Heard folks say you were crazy. Nathan smiled back. They might be right. Calvin handed him the envelope. No hurry. Just read it. Thomas looked puzzled but opened it anyway. His eyes moved slowly across the copied page. The smile disappeared. He read it again, then again. Nathan watched the enormous rancher suddenly become 16 years old. The ledger read, September 18th. Thomas Miller. Flat tire. Hungry. Scared to tell his father. Bought replacement tire through Arthur's repair shop. Fed him supper. Asked only that he someday help someone else who felt stranded. Thomas lowered the paper. I thought, his voice faltered. I thought my father paid for that tire. Calvin shook his head gently. Elias never wanted anyone to know. Thomas looked toward the mountains for a long moment. I've driven past that mill hundreds of times. I never stopped. Nathan quietly answered. It's still there. Thomas folded the paper carefully. Wait here. He disappeared into the barn. Several minutes later, he returned carrying building plans. I own a roofing company now. Nathan blinked. Thomas smiled. That roof of yours, it's not surviving another winter. Nathan started to protest. I can't afford. Thomas raised one hand. I'm not sending a bill. He looked once more at the ledger. I've been carrying this debt for 30 years. I just didn't know it. He extended his hand. Tomorrow morning. My crew starts at daylight. Nathan shook it firmly. Thank you. Thomas smiled. No. You thank Elias. The second stop lay outside neighboring Pine Valley. A small engineering office overlooked an old covered bridge. Its owner, Rebecca Collins, specialized in restoring historic mountain structures. She frowned curiously as Calvin handed her another envelope. Minutes later, she sat silently staring at a copied ledger entry. May 2nd. Paid tuition for Rebecca Collins after scholarship. Unexpectedly failed. Asked principal never to reveal donor. Brilliant students should not lose their future over money. Rebecca looked up. My mother told me an educational foundation helped. Calvin smiled softly. It wasn't a foundation. It was one stubborn mill owner. Rebecca laughed through tears. I've spent 20 years restoring old buildings. She looked directly at Nathan. I suppose I know where I'm working next. By sunset, they had visited 5 people. A retired firefighter, a carpenter, a mechanic, a widowed orchard owner. Every stop followed the same pattern: confusion, recognition, silence, gratitude. No one was asked for money. No one received a request. The ledger itself did all the speaking. Word traveled through the valley faster than Nathan expected. By the following afternoon, trucks began arriving without invitations. One carried lumber, another unloaded electrical supplies. A local plumbing contractor parked beside the mill carrying copper pipe across one shoulder. An excavator rumbled slowly into the clearing behind a flatbed trailer. Nathan stood speechless. Who called all these people? Calvin smiled. I didn't. They called each other. The old mill, silent for years, slowly filled with voices. Hammers echoed through the valley, circular saws whined, generators hummed, people laughed while clearing debris together. Someone repaired windows. Someone else rebuilt porch supports. Another crew inspected the damaged foundation. No contracts, no invoices, only neighbors. Nathan found himself standing in the middle of it all without knowing where to begin. Valor solved the problem. The old German shepherd wandered quietly from crew to crew. Children immediately gathered around him. Veterans knelt to scratch behind his ears after noticing the faded military harness. Older women slipped him treats despite Nathan's playful protests. Even strangers trusted the aging dog instinctively. Valor accepted every gentle hand with quiet dignity before returning faithfully to Nathan's side. Watching him, Nathan realized something. The retired military dog wasn't merely guarding the mill anymore. He was introducing its new keeper to the people it belonged to. Late that afternoon, Nathan climbed onto the repaired porch to look across the valley. Smoke curled from chimneys. Autumn leaves shimmered beneath the mountain sun. Below him, neighbors worked together as though rebuilding the mill had become everyone's responsibility. Calvin joined him carrying 2 cups of coffee. I told you. Nathan looked over. Told me what? The valley remembered. Nathan watched Thomas Miller's roofing crew measuring rafters. Rebecca Collins studied cracked stone foundations with 2 engineers. The retired firefighter organized volunteers clearing brush. No one had asked them to come. They simply came. Nathan smiled quietly. Elias was right. Calvin nodded. Kindness keeps moving. Before Nathan could answer, Valor suddenly lifted his head. The old German shepherd stopped wagging his tail. His ears stood forward. His eyes locked toward the gravel road leading into the valley. Far beyond the volunteers, a black luxury SUV sat partially hidden behind the trees. Its engine remained running, behind the windshield, Landon Pierce watched every person working on the mill. Then, without stepping out of the vehicle, he slowly turned around and drove away. Nathan watched the black SUV disappear beyond the trees until the last trace of dust settled back onto the gravel road. He didn't say anything. Neither did Calvin. But both men understood the same thing. Landon Pierce had expected to find a condemned ruin. Instead, he had found a community rebuilding it. That changed everything. Valor remained standing on the porch, staring toward the empty road long after the vehicle had disappeared. The old German shepherd rarely reacted without reason. Nathan trusted that instinct. "We keep watch tonight," he said quietly. Calvin nodded. "I'll tell everyone to lock up before dark." As the sun slipped behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, the volunteers packed away their tools. Fresh roof beams now stretched across nearly half the mill. Broken windows had been replaced with temporary panes. The front porch stood level again. Electricians had restored several interior circuits using a portable generator. For the first time in years, warm light spilled from the old mill's windows after sunset. It looked alive. Neighbors gathered for a simple meal inside. Someone brought homemade chili. Another family delivered fresh cornbread. Rebecca Collins spread structural drawings across one of the old tables while Thomas Miller explained the next phase of repairs. Laughter drifted through the room. For a brief evening, the mill felt less like a construction site and more like home. Nathan stood quietly near the doorway. Watching people smile inside a building that had nearly been demolished reminded him of military field camps after successful rescue missions. Different people, different purpose, the same feeling. Hope. When the last truck finally pulled away, silence returned to the valley. Nathan checked every door, every window, every fuel container. The volunteers had stacked lumber beneath large tarps beside the workshop. Generators had been shut down. Power tools locked away. Valor completed his own inspection without being asked. He walked the property perimeter slowly, stopping occasionally to test the wind before continuing. Nathan smiled, still running security. The old dog briefly wagged his tail. Night settled over the mountains. Clouds covered the stars. The moon disappeared behind thick gray layers drifting across the valley. Nathan spread his sleeping bag inside the office, but sleep never came easily. He checked the clock. 11:17 p.m., then midnight. Then 1. The old rhythm of military life returned. Listen. Wait. Observe. Around 2 in the morning, Valor lifted his head. Instantly, every muscle became rigid. Nathan sat upright. "What is it?" The German shepherd was already standing. No barking, no growling, just listening. Nathan reached for the flashlight beside his sleeping bag. Outside, everything appeared still. Wind rustled through the trees. The creek flowed steadily beneath the repaired water wheel. Nothing moved. Then Valor bolted toward the rear entrance. Nathan followed immediately. The cold night air struck his face as he stepped outside. For 1 second, he saw nothing. Then a faint orange glow flickered behind the storage shed. Nathan froze. Fire. He sprinted across the muddy ground. The stack of newly delivered lumber burned fiercely beneath one of the tarps. Flames climbed rapidly toward the mill's wooden walls. Water! Nathan shouted instinctively, though no one else was there to hear him. He grabbed the nearest hose connected to a temporary water tank. Nothing. The pressure wasn't enough. He abandoned it immediately. Instead, he seized a shovel, throwing dirt across the spreading flames while kicking burning boards away from the building. The fire continued growing. Heat blasted against his face. Smoke thickened rapidly. Then, Valor barked. One sharp warning. Nathan turned. A dark figure emerged briefly between the trees beyond the storage area. Someone was running. Nathan took 2 steps after the stranger, then stopped. The fire. Saving the mill came first. The figure disappeared into the darkness. Valor made a different choice. Ignoring his healing shoulder, the old German shepherd charged after the fleeing intruder. Nathan heard crashing branches. Heavy footsteps, then a cry. Not from Valor, from the person running. The sounds vanished deeper into the forest. Nathan wanted to follow. Instead, he forced himself back toward the flames. Military training took over. Protect lives. Contain damage. Preserve structure. Everything else came later. He dragged burning lumber away from the workshop wall before flames could reach the roof. Using buckets from the creek, he created a barrier across the dry grass surrounding the fire. Piece by piece, minute by minute, the blaze finally began losing strength. Just as the largest flames collapsed, Nathan heard another sound, a sharp, painful whine. His heart dropped. Valor. He ran toward the tree line, flashlight sweeping wildly across wet leaves. Valor. Nothing. Only darkness. His breathing quickened. Not again. Not after everything they'd survived together. Then, another weak whimper. Nathan found him lying beside a fallen oak. The old German shepherd struggled to stand. Blood stained the bandage already wrapped around his shoulder. A fresh wound crossed his ribs where torn metal or broken fencing had ripped through his coat during the chase. Nathan dropped to his knees. No. Valor slowly wagged his tail anyway. Even now, Nathan gently examined him. The bleeding was steady, but not severe. The dog had clearly collided with something sharp while pursuing whoever had fled. Nathan looked around. Fresh footprints covered the soft ground. Boot prints, not his own. Nearby lay a black knit cap, dropped during the escape. Nathan picked it up carefully. No name, no markings, nothing identifying, only the unmistakable proof that someone had been there. He wrapped his jacket around Valor. Come on, partner. The old dog tried standing again. This time Nathan supported most of his weight. Step by painful step. They made their way back to the mill. The fire had finally burned itself down to smoking embers. The building still stood. Barely. One exterior wall had been scorched. Several support beams showed fire damage. Half the lumber delivered by volunteers had been destroyed. Nathan collapsed onto the porch beside Valor. The first light of dawn slowly appeared over the mountains. Within an hour, pickup trucks began arriving. Thomas Miller was first. He stopped his truck abruptly after seeing the smoke. Rebecca Collins followed moments later. Then Calvin. Soon, nearly everyone who had been helping stood silently in the blackened yard. No one spoke at first. The damage spoke loudly enough. Calvin knelt beside Valor. The old man's face tightened. He protected the place. Nathan nodded. He chased whoever did this. Rebecca examined the burned supports carefully. This wasn't an accident. Thomas walked around the storage area. He stopped beside several empty fuel containers. One still smelled strongly of gasoline. He looked back toward Nathan. Someone poured accelerant. Silence settled over the group. Nathan reached into his pocket and removed the black knit cap. I never saw his face. But someone wanted this mill gone. Later that morning, the county sheriff arrived. Deputies photographed everything, measured footprints, collected the cap. One deputy pointed toward a security camera mounted on a temporary pole near the front gate. We'll know exactly who came in. Nathan felt a surge of cautious relief. Until the deputy climbed down carrying the recording unit. His expression changed immediately. The hard drive's gone. Nathan frowned. What? It was removed. The deputy held up several cleanly cut wires. Whoever did this knew exactly where the recorder was. Every piece of footage, gone. The sheriff quietly closed his notebook. We'll investigate. Nathan had heard those words before. Too many times. The deputies eventually drove away. Smoke still drifted upward through the cold mountain air. Nathan looked down at Valor lying beside him. The old German shepherd's breathing remained steady despite the fresh injuries. He gently rested one hand against the dog's neck. You saved it. Valor slowly closed his tired eyes. Nathan lifted his head toward the scarred mill. The attack hadn't destroyed it, but something had changed forever. Saving Granger Mill was no longer just a race against time. Someone had decided it was worth hurting people to make sure the river finished what greed could not. The smoke lingered over Granger Mill for 2 days. Even after the fire was gone, the smell clung to the old beams, the stone walls, and the damp mountain air. Every blackened board reminded Nathan how quickly hope could burn. Valor lay quietly on a blanket inside the mill office. The veterinarian in Ash Hollow had cleaned the deep cuts along his ribs and shoulder, stitched what could be closed, and warned Nathan that the old dog needed several weeks of rest. He'll recover, the veterinarian had said gently. But he's not young anymore. Nathan nodded without speaking. He had heard those words before. Not about Valor. About himself. That night, the mill felt strangely empty. The volunteers had all gone home. The generators were silent. Only the river continued its endless conversation with the valley. Nathan sat beside Valor, slowly stroking the gray fur around the old dog's neck. I'm sorry. Valor opened one eye. I'm the one who brought you here. The German shepherd responded the same way he always had. He leaned closer. No blame. No hesitation. Only trust. Nathan looked away. Trust. That was what hurt. The old dog had followed him through war, through homelessness, through hunger, through freezing nights inside an old pickup truck. Now he carried fresh scars because Nathan had chosen to fight for an abandoned mill. Sleep came late. When it finally arrived, it brought familiar darkness. Nathan dreamed of another fire, another rescue, another teammate shouting through thick smoke. He reached for someone, couldn't get there in time. The explosion came anyway. Nathan woke with a violent gasp. His hand instinctively searched for the rifle that no longer existed. Instead, his fingers found rough wooden floorboards. The mill. North Carolina, not overseas. He closed his eyes. His breathing refused to slow. The panic settled like heavy stone inside his chest. By sunrise, Nathan had already made his decision. He packed his backpack, folded his sleeping bag, placed Elias Granger's letter inside the front pocket. Then he looked around the mill one last time. It was a good idea. He whispered, "It just wasn't my fight." Valor slowly struggled to his feet. His bandaged shoulder trembled. Nathan knelt beside him. "We're leaving." The dog didn't move. Nathan clipped on the leash. Valor still refused. For the first time in years, the old German shepherd quietly resisted one of Nathan's commands. Not aggressively, simply planting all four paws against the wooden floor. Nathan sighed. "Please." Valor looked toward the front door, then toward the hidden stairway beneath the mill, then back at Nathan. Nathan felt something inside himself crack. "I know." His voice broke. "I know. But everyone who gets close to me ends up bleeding." He unclipped the leash. Valor immediately lay back down beside the doorway, as if making his own decision. A truck pulled into the yard before Nathan could gather the rest of his things. Calvin Mercer stepped out first. Behind him came Rebecca Collins, Thomas Miller, Margaret Lawson, then another truck, and another. Within minutes, nearly a dozen volunteers stood quietly outside. No one carried tools, no one started working. Calvin approached first. "You leaving?" Nathan nodded once. "I can't ask people to keep risking themselves." Thomas looked toward the burned lumber. Nobody asked permission. Nathan gave a tired smile. "This isn't about permission. It's about consequences." He glanced toward Valor. "He almost died because of me." Rebecca stepped forward. "No." She answered calmly. He was protecting something he believed mattered. Nathan shook his head. "I brought him here, and I brought all of you into this." Calvin remained silent for several moments before speaking. "You know what Elias wrote about me?" Nathan looked up. Calvin continued. "When my feed warehouse burned, I wanted to quit. I told Elias I'd lost everything. He looked me square in the eye and said, 'You only lose everything the day you stop letting people stand beside you.'" Nathan stared quietly. Thomas spoke next. "When I was 16, I thought one flat tire had ruined my life. Elias fixed the tire, but that's not what saved me. He let me believe accepting help wasn't weakness." Rebecca nodded. "My college education existed because someone helped me without asking for anything back." She smiled gently. "If I refused to help someone else, that gift would stop with me. Margaret Lawson stepped closer. I've practiced law for 40 years. I've seen people fight over money. I've watched families destroy themselves over inheritance. She looked toward the old mill. This is the first inheritance I've ever seen that grows by being shared. Nathan lowered his eyes. His hands trembled slightly. I've spent my whole life trying to protect everyone else. Calvin answered quietly. That's exactly your problem. Nathan looked confused. The old feed store owner smiled kindly. You never learned how to let anyone protect you. Silence settled over the yard. The words struck harder than any accusation. Nathan remembered every mission, every decision, every burden he had carried alone because he believed leaders weren't supposed to lean on anyone else. Somewhere along the way, he had mistaken isolation for strength. Thomas reached into the back of his truck. He carried out several new roof beams. I didn't bring these because you asked. I brought them because Elias once helped me. Rebecca unloaded rolled engineering plans. I'm here because someone invested in my future. Margaret removed a thick folder from her briefcase. I spent last night reviewing every property record connected to this mill. Nathan frowned. Why? Because lawyers repay kindness differently. She smiled. I'm not finished searching yet. Calvin walked over to Valor. The old German shepherd slowly lifted his head. Calvin scratched gently behind one ear. You've got one stubborn partner. He looked toward Nathan. And so do we. Nathan glanced around the valley. No one had left. No one blamed him. No one demanded guarantees. They simply stayed. Just as Elias had hoped someone someday would. Nathan felt tears filling his eyes. Not from grief, from relief. A burden he had carried for years quietly shifted. He wasn't alone anymore. He walked slowly toward Valor and knelt beside him. The old dog looked up. Nathan smiled through damp eyes. I almost made the same mistake everyone else made. Valor tilted his head. I thought saving people meant carrying everything myself. He gently rested his forehead against the dog's. I was wrong. The German shepherd licked Nathan's cheek once. Around them, volunteers quietly returned to work. Someone lifted new lumber. Someone repaired damaged supports. Rebecca began directing structural inspections. Thomas measured replacement beams. Calvin carried fresh supplies toward the workshop. No speeches, no ceremony, just people choosing to stay. Nathan stood. He picked up the first hammer lying on the workbench. The familiar weight settled comfortably into his hand. He looked across the valley. The mill still bore the scars of fire. Valor still wore fresh bandages. His own nightmares hadn't disappeared. None of those things had changed. But something inside him had. For the first time since leaving the Navy, Nathan allowed himself to believe that courage wasn't always measured by carrying impossible burdens alone. Sometimes, the bravest thing a broken man could do was accept the hands reaching out to help him stand. The days that followed carried a different rhythm through the valley. The sound of hammers mixed with birdsong. Generators hummed from sunrise until dusk. Fresh-cut lumber filled the air with the scent of pine, replacing the lingering smell of smoke that had haunted the mill after the fire. Nathan no longer worked ahead of everyone else. He worked beside them. Thomas Miller's roofing crew replaced the damaged rafters. Rebecca Collins supervised crews stabilizing the old stone foundation beneath the water wheel. Calvin Mercer somehow managed to arrive every morning with coffee before anyone else, insisting no worthwhile rebuilding ever started on an empty stomach. Margaret Lawson disappeared for hours at a time into county archives, returning each evening with another folder tucked beneath her arm. She never explained much, only smiled and said, "Keep building." Valor remained under strict orders from the veterinarian to rest. He clearly disagreed. Each morning he limped from station to station, quietly inspecting the work as though conducting his own security rounds. Children who came with their parents sat beside him while adults worked. Older veterans stopped to scratch behind his ears before picking up another tool. Nathan often caught people talking to Valor as if he understood every word. Perhaps he did. The old German shepherd never sought attention. He simply accepted every gentle hand before returning to his favorite place near the porch, where he could watch both the mill and the road leading into the valley. 6 days remained before the county's demolition deadline. By then, the roof had been fully repaired. Electricity flowed through most of the building again. The kitchen lights glowed warmly each evening, illuminating polished wooden floors that had been buried beneath mud only weeks earlier. The old mill was beginning to breathe again. Then the weather changed. Nathan noticed it before sunrise. The mountains had disappeared. Instead of crisp autumn skies, thick charcoal clouds pressed low against the ridges. Wind swept through the valley in restless bursts, carrying the sharp smell of approaching rain. Rebecca studied the sky from the scaffold. "I don't like that front." Thomas checked his weather radio. His expression tightened. "They're calling for record rainfall." Nathan looked toward Granger Creek. The current already moved faster than it had the previous day. By noon, rain began falling. Not hard. Steady. Cold. The kind that soaked everything without appearing dangerous. By mid-afternoon, the creek had climbed several inches. Workers quietly moved tools farther from the river. Sandbags appeared around vulnerable entrances. Nobody panicked. Mountain communities understood rivers. But by sunset, the rain became something else. Sheets of water slammed across the valley. Wind bent tall pines until they groaned. Thunder rolled continuously across the mountains. The creek transformed into a roaring wall of muddy water. Nathan stood beneath the porch, watching floating tree trunks race downstream. His military instincts quietly returned. Observe. Prepare. Stay ahead. Thomas hurried toward him through the rain. The lower bridge is already underwater. Rebecca arrived moments later. The retaining wall should hold. She paused. If the water rises another 3 feet. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Nathan looked around. Move everything off the ground floor. Volunteers sprang into action. Power tools. Medical supplies. Food. Generators. Everything that could be carried was lifted onto the second level. Others reinforced sandbag lines. Calvin directed traffic with surprising authority. No one argued. Everyone simply moved. By midnight, rain still hadn't stopped. Nathan climbed onto the porch railing and shined his flashlight across the valley. The old county road had vanished beneath floodwater. The mill had become an island. Then, Valor stood. Nathan noticed immediately. The old dog ignored the rising creek entirely. Instead, he stared downstream. His ears lifted. His body stiffened. Nathan followed his gaze. Nothing. Only darkness and rain. Then, a faint sound. Not thunder. A horn. One desperate blast. Then another. Nathan focused harder. Headlights. Weak. Flashing through curtains of rain nearly half a mile away. He grabbed binoculars from the office. A yellow shape barely remained visible. A small school bus. Half sideways, pinned against the guardrail where the flooded road crossed a narrow section of Granger Creek. The current slammed into it relentlessly. Nathan's pulse accelerated. There are people out there. Thomas looked through the binoculars. My God. The bus shifted. Only inches. But enough. Nathan didn't hesitate. Rescue gear. The words came automatically. Years of training erased every trace of uncertainty. Ropes, life jackets, axes, medical kits, volunteers scattered. Rebecca grabbed climbing rope. Thomas loaded recovery straps into his truck. Calvin started gathering blankets. Within 3 minutes, equipment lay ready on the porch. Nathan knelt beside Valor. No. He pointed firmly toward the doorway. You stay. Valor stared at him. Nathan touched the fresh bandage across the old dog's shoulder. You've done enough. The German shepherd remained perfectly still. Nathan believed he understood. He climbed into Thomas's lifted pickup with 2 volunteers. The truck fought through rising water until the road disappeared completely. Beyond that point, they continued on foot. The current reached Nathan's knees, then his waist. Rain hammered against his face. Lightning illuminated the valley in brief flashes of white. The bus came into view. Half submerged. Children pressed frightened faces against fogged windows. The driver struggled to keep everyone calm. The front wheels hung over the washed-out edge of the bridge. One more shift. The entire bus would disappear into the torrent. Nathan quickly assessed everything. Distance, current, anchor points, escape routes. Training took over. Secure that oak. He pointed toward the largest tree on the riverbank. Thomas and another volunteer wrapped climbing rope around the trunk. Nathan clipped into the safety line. I'll go first. Rebecca grabbed his arm. The bridge won't hold. Nathan nodded. I know. He stepped into the flood. Every movement required deliberate effort. The current tried pulling him downstream. Twice he nearly lost his footing. The safety rope held. Halfway across, a bark echoed through the storm. Nathan turned. Valor. The old German shepherd had ignored every command. Despite stitched wounds and aching joints, he had followed. He stood on the riverbank barking furiously toward the bus. Then suddenly he lunged toward a different section of the flooded crossing. Nathan froze. The dog wasn't looking at the bus. He was looking beneath the water. Nathan understood instantly. The pavement ahead had collapsed. He changed direction immediately. 3 seconds later, the section where he had intended to step vanished beneath the current. Thomas stared in disbelief. He just saved you again. Nathan reached the bus safely. Inside, frightened children clung to one another while the driver struggled to keep panic from spreading. Nathan climbed aboard. His calm voice filled the shaking vehicle. "My name's Nathan. We're getting every one of you home. No running, no pushing. We do this together." The youngest child looked toward the rain-covered window. "Is that your dog?" Nathan smiled. "It is." The little boy nodded. "He found us." Nathan glanced outside. Valor stood unmoving in the rain, watching, waiting, guarding. One family at a time, Nathan and the volunteers guided everyone across the safety lines. Parents, children, the driver. The last child had barely reached solid ground when a deafening crack echoed through the valley. The bridge collapsed. The school bus disappeared into the flood. Silence followed. Only the river remained. Nathan looked toward the mill in the distance. Its lights still glowed warmly through the storm. The place Elias Granger had built to shelter strangers was about to do exactly that once again. By dawn, soaked families filled every room of the restored mill. Blankets covered frightened children. Coffee warmed exhausted first responders. Soup simmered on portable stoves. Neighbors shared dry clothing without asking names. Nathan stood quietly in the doorway, watching strangers comfort one another beneath the same roof that had once protected countless lives before them. Elias had been right. The mill had never existed merely to survive floods. It existed to stand when everything else gave way, and as Valor slowly lay down beside the entrance, exhausted but alert, Nathan finally understood that the greatest rescue happening that night was not only the one unfolding in the storm outside. It was the quiet restoration of the mill's true purpose. Morning arrived wrapped in mist. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a valley washed clean. Sunlight filtered through broken clouds, touching the old water wheel with soft, golden light. The creek still rushed past the mill, swollen and powerful, but it no longer sounded threatening. It sounded alive. Inside the building, exhausted families slowly awakened. Children laughed quietly over steaming pancakes made from whatever supplies volunteers had managed to save. Parents embraced one another with the fragile relief that follows surviving disaster. The rescued school bus driver found Nathan near the porch. He extended a weathered hand. "I've driven these mountain roads for 23 years. His voice shook slightly. "I've never been happier to meet a stranger." Nathan smiled. "I wasn't a stranger." The driver looked around the busy mill. "No." He answered softly. "I guess none of us were." Valor rested nearby. His bandaged shoulder rose and fell with slow, steady breaths. Nearly every child who had spent the night at the mill stopped to pet him before leaving. The old German shepherd accepted every small hand with patient dignity. His scarred muzzle seemed to carry years of quiet understanding. One little girl hugged his neck before climbing into her father's truck. "Thank you for finding us." Valor gently wagged his tail. Nathan looked away for a moment. His eyes had become suspiciously damp. By late afternoon, the valley slowly returned to normal. Emergency crews reopened the main highway. Families headed home. Volunteers resumed repairing the mill where the flood had interrupted their work. Then Margaret Lawson arrived. She carried 3 thick archive boxes balanced carefully in her arms. Her face revealed nothing, only determination. "I found something." Everyone gradually gathered around the long wooden table inside the mill. Thomas, Rebecca, Calvin, Nathan. Several volunteers paused their work. Margaret removed one weathered document after another. Survey maps, maintenance logs, historic photographs, county engineering reports dating back more than 70 years. Finally, she unfolded a yellowed blueprint across the table. "This," she said quietly, "was hidden inside Elias Granger's original maintenance records." Nathan leaned closer. The faded handwriting matched the journals discovered beneath the mill. Margaret pointed toward a paragraph typed beneath the original construction plans. In 1978, Elias successfully petitioned the state to classify this property under a special preservation covenant. Thomas frowned. "I've never heard of that." "Almost nobody has." Margaret smiled faintly. It was rarely used. She carefully adjusted her glasses. "The covenant states that if the mill is ever proven to provide ongoing historical, humanitarian, or emergency community service, the property cannot be condemned for commercial redevelopment." Silence filled the room. Rebecca blinked. "The emergency shelter." Margaret nodded. "The flood, the rescues, the historical ledgers, the decades of documented community service." She looked toward Nathan. "Elias built legal protection into the future." Calvin laughed quietly. "That stubborn old man." Nathan stared at the documents. "So," Margaret smiled for the first time in days. "So tomorrow's county hearing won't be about demolition anymore. It will be about whether this mill deserves permanent protection." The next morning, the county courthouse overflowed with people. Word had spread throughout the Blue Ridge communities overnight. Farmers, veterans, teachers, mechanics, retired firefighters. Families carrying faded photographs, elderly couples holding worn envelopes, former travelers who had once found shelter during winter storms. The hallway buzzed with quiet anticipation. Nathan stood near the courtroom entrance wearing the only clean flannel shirt he owned. He felt strangely uncomfortable. Crowds had never suited him. Valor remained at his side wearing a fresh service harness provided by one of the local veterans. Children smiled as they passed. Several deputies stopped to greet the old German shepherd before taking their seats. Across the hallway stood Landon Pierce. His tailored suit looked flawless. His expensive shoes reflected the courthouse lights. Beside him waited 2 attorneys carrying thick presentation binders. Landon noticed Nathan. He smiled confidently. "You've delayed the inevitable." Nathan answered calmly. "We'll see." Landon chuckled. "You saved a few people. That's admirable, but heroics don't rewrite property law." Margaret stepped between them. "They might." Landon's smile faded slightly. Inside the courtroom, every seat quickly filled. The county commissioners entered. Proceedings began. Landon's attorneys presented first. Large development renderings appeared on display boards. Luxury cabins. A riverside resort. Private fishing access. Projected tax revenue. Employment estimates. Everything polished. Everything profitable. When they finished, Landon stood. This valley deserves economic growth. He spoke confidently. The existing structure has reached the end of its useful life. It represents unnecessary financial risk. He sat down. Satisfied. The lead commissioner nodded toward Margaret Lawson. Your response? Margaret stood. She carried no display boards. Only one weathered leather ledger. She placed it gently before the commissioners. This, she began quietly, is not simply a bookkeeping record. It is 30 years of documented community service. She opened the first page. Instead of speaking herself, she invited witnesses. Thomas Miller approached first. He described the day Elias repaired his tire, fed a frightened teenager, and quietly changed the direction of his life. Rebecca Collins followed. She explained how anonymous financial help had allowed her to attend engineering school after her father died. An elderly firefighter described mortgage payments that had saved his family farm. A widow told the story of groceries left anonymously on her porch during the hardest winter of her life. One after another. People filled the courtroom. Not with opinions, with memories. Each carried evidence, old letters, canceled checks, photographs, handwritten notes. Every story matched entries found in Elias's hidden ledgers. The courtroom gradually became silent. Even Landon's attorneys stopped taking notes. Then came the rescued school bus driver. He looked directly at the commissioners. Yesterday, this building saved 18 children. I don't care what any appraisal says. I know what I saw. The commissioners listened carefully. Margaret finally unfolded the preservation covenant. She explained every legal requirement, then quietly submitted photographs from the recent flood. Emergency shelter records, volunteer logs, statements from county emergency management. Every condition had been fulfilled. The chairman adjusted his glasses. He slowly reviewed the final page, then looked toward Landon. Mr. Pierce, it appears this property now qualifies for permanent preservation status. Landon immediately stood. This is absurd. My company purchased development rights. Margaret remained perfectly calm. No, she answered. You purchased expectations. The covenant predates every contract you signed. Landon's face flushed. His attorneys rapidly searched through their documents. None of them found an answer. The chairman raised his gavel. Based upon unanimous review, the Granger Mill Preservation Covenant is hereby recognized. The property shall receive permanent historical and humanitarian protection. It cannot be condemned for commercial redevelopment. The gavel struck. The sound echoed through the courtroom. For a moment, nobody moved. Then quiet applause began. It spread slowly, growing louder, not triumphant, grateful. Nathan closed his eyes. He hadn't realized how tightly he had been holding his breath. Beside him, Valor leaned gently against his leg. Calvin smiled through wet eyes. I told you, Elias planned further ahead than anyone. Across the courtroom, Landon Pierce gathered his papers without speaking. The confidence that had followed him for months had disappeared. He looked once toward Nathan, then toward the hundreds of ordinary people standing together. For the first time, he understood he had never been fighting one homeless veteran. He had been standing against an entire community. He slowly lowered his head, turned toward the exit, and walked away alone. Outside, sunlight flooded the courthouse steps. Families embraced. Children laughed. Volunteers shook hands. Reporters gathered around the crowd, but Nathan quietly slipped toward the edge of the celebration. He preferred silence. Margaret caught up with him. You could stay. Nathan smiled. I've had enough attention for one lifetime. She laughed softly. So has Valor. The old German shepherd accepted another grateful pat from a little boy before returning faithfully to Nathan's side. Together, they looked across the mountains stretching beyond the courthouse. The battle for the mill had ended. But Nathan knew something even more important had quietly begun. For the first time in years, he wasn't searching for somewhere to belong. He had already found it. Winter settled gently across the Blue Ridge Mountains. Snow gathered on the old stone walls of Granger Mill, softening every sharp edge the seasons had carved into the building. The water wheel turned steadily beneath a pale morning sky, its wooden paddles catching the current with the same patient rhythm they had followed decades before. The river no longer sounded like a warning. To Nathan Cole, it sounded like home. The mill had changed in ways no blueprint could have predicted. The lower floor still held its restored machinery and preserved history, but the upper rooms had become something entirely new. Simple bunk rooms welcomed veterans passing through the mountains. A warm dining hall served local families after storms, volunteer firefighters after long shifts, and travelers stranded by snow. One room had been converted into a quiet counseling space where people who carried invisible wounds could sit without judgment. There were no luxury decorations, no expensive furniture, only sturdy wooden tables built by local carpenters, quilts sewn by church volunteers, shelves filled with donated books, and walls covered with photographs documenting the mill's remarkable journey. Near the entrance hung a simple hand-painted sign. Welcome. Leave stronger than you arrived. Nathan had protested when the volunteers first suggested naming the place after him. He refused. It was never mine, he told them. It belonged to Elias before me, and someday it'll belong to someone after me. So they named it the Granger Mill Community Refuge. Nathan considered that exactly right. Each morning began the same way. Long before sunrise, Nathan unlocked the front door while snow crunched beneath his boots. He started the coffee, lit the wood stove, checked the emergency pantry. Then he walked outside to greet the river. Valor always accompanied him. The old German shepherd moved slower now. The scars across his shoulder had healed into silver streaks beneath thick winter fur, permanent reminders of the night he stood between fire and the people he loved. Children who visited the mill rarely noticed the scars. Adults always did. Veterans noticed something else. The way Valor quietly positioned himself beside anyone sitting alone. The way he rested his head on a trembling knee without invitation. the way anxious breathing often slowed after only a few silent minutes beside him. No one had trained him to do that. Perhaps life had. One snowy afternoon, Nathan welcomed a group of recently discharged service members from a nearby veterans transition program. Some stayed only for lunch, others remained the weekend. One young Army medic lingered after everyone else had left. He stared into the fireplace without speaking. Nathan recognized the 1,000-yard stare immediately. He remembered carrying it himself. The young man finally broke the silence. "I don't fit anywhere anymore." Nathan nodded slowly. "I used to believe that too." The medic looked at him. "What changed?" Nathan glanced toward Valor, who slept peacefully beside the fire. "I stopped looking for the life I lost." He smiled gently and started building one that needed me. The young medic absorbed those words quietly. No miracle occurred. No dramatic breakthrough. Just one broken veteran speaking honestly to another. Sometimes that was enough. The community continued growing around the mill. Rebecca organized emergency preparedness classes every month. Thomas Miller brought local high school students to learn carpentry and restoration work. Calvin Mercer still delivered coffee every morning, despite everyone's insistence that he deserved to retire. Margaret Lawson established a nonprofit trust, ensuring the property would always remain protected, regardless of who managed it in future generations. The ledgers remained locked safely inside the restored stone chamber beneath the mill. Nathan visited them only occasionally, not because he needed instruction anymore, but because he wanted to remember. One evening, he opened the final journal Elias Granger had written. He read again the familiar sentence. "Kindness is only complete when it keeps moving." Nathan closed the book carefully. He finally understood. The ledgers had never been intended as records of the past. They were instructions for the future. Outside, fresh snow continued falling. The valley became wonderfully quiet. Just before closing time, headlights appeared beyond the bridge. An aging pickup truck rolled slowly into the parking area. The engine sputtered once before dying completely. Nathan watched from the porch. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out wearing a faded Marine Corps jacket that had seen better days. His beard was thick, his face exhausted. Everything he owned fit inside 2 weathered duffel bags. Behind him climbed an older Labrador retriever with cloudy eyes and stiff joints. The dog stayed pressed against the man's leg. Neither looked dangerous, only tired. The Marine hesitated near the porch steps. "I'm sorry." He spoke almost apologetically. "I saw the lights." Nathan studied him for only a moment. He remembered another cold evening. Another abandoned property. Another frightened man with nowhere left to go. He smiled. "You came to the right place." The Marine glanced down. "I don't have any money." Nathan opened the door wider. "Good." The man looked confused. Nathan laughed softly. "We've never measured people that way around here." Warm air drifted outside, carrying the smell of fresh soup and homemade bread. The Labrador cautiously wagged its tail. Valor slowly rose from his blanket near the stove. Though older and slower than before, He walked across the room with quiet confidence. He stopped in front of the Labrador. The two old dogs sniffed one another gently. No growling, no fear, only recognition. Two veterans, each carrying scars the other somehow understood. Nathan watched them, then turned toward the newcomer. "Come inside. The coffee's hot. So is dinner." The Marine removed his worn cap. His eyes shimmered with quiet gratitude. "I don't know how to repay you." Nathan paused. He remembered the very first ledger, the hidden tunnel, the countless anonymous acts of compassion. Then he answered with words that had crossed generations. "You don't. You simply carry it forward." Later that night, after everyone had eaten, after the snowstorm wrapped the mountains in silence, Nathan walked into the small office overlooking the river. A brand new leather ledger rested on the desk. Blank pages waited patiently beneath the warm glow of a single lamp. Nathan uncapped his fountain pen. For a long moment he simply listened. The water wheel turning, the river flowing. Valor breathing peacefully beside the stove. Then he wrote the very first entry, one warm meal, one safe night, already repaid. He closed the ledger. Outside, dawn began touching the highest mountain peaks with pale gold. The old water wheel continued turning exactly as it had for generations, not because the river demanded it, because the river never stopped moving. Nathan stepped onto the porch beside Valor. Together they watched sunlight spread across the valley. Months earlier, he had believed the flood had hidden treasure beneath the mill. He knew better now. The river had never protected gold. It had protected a promise. It had guarded the memory of one man's compassion until another broken soul was ready to carry it. Nathan rested a hand gently on Valor's weathered head. The old German shepherd leaned quietly against him. No medals, no applause, no headlines. Only a mountain morning, a faithful dog, a restored mill, and a legacy that would never again be buried beneath the water. Because the greatest inheritance had never been the building. It had never been the land. It had never even been the ledgers. It was the decision, made one ordinary day after another, to leave every frightened stranger a little warmer, a little safer, and a little less alone than when they first arrived. And as long as the river kept flowing through the Blue Ridge Mountains, that promise would keep moving with it. If you believe kindness is the greatest legacy anyone can leave behind, comment 1. If someone once changed your life with a simple act of compassion, comment 0 and share where you're watching from. And if stories about courage, loyalty, and ordinary Americans standing strong speak to your heart, subscribe and join us for the next journey.